my shame backpack where I just kept piling every time something went wrong. I just put something more in the backpack, and then that just like weighs down your self-esteem over time. There's multiple ways people respond. Me, I would blow up and get big and get angry because which I didn't know at the time. At the time, it felt justified, but I know now it was like defensive mechanism. Like I don't want them to reject me, so I'm going to blow up so that we can't get to that part where they say the bad thing about me.
You are listening to My Rejection Story, hosted by Alice Draper. Welcome back to My Rejection Story, where we explore the heartbreaks and hard stops that shape who we become. Today's guest knows rejection from the inside out, being rejected by institutions, people, and perhaps hardest of all, his own mind. Jesse J. Anderson is an ADHD advocate, best-selling author, and someone who lived decades feeling like he didn't quite fit, until he realized his brain wasn't broken, it was just wired differently. Jesse is the author of Extra Focus and a leading voice in the adult ADHD community. He's helped thousands of people stop seeing their ADHD as a flaw and start seeing it as a unique strength. And today, we're unpacking not just his personal rejection stories, but the power of sharing them openly. Jesse, welcome to My Rejection Story.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Me too. I'm excited to have you here. So in your book, I think you spoke about this in your book and definitely in some podcast interviews, you talk about how it was your friend getting diagnosed that led to, I think it was your wife that picked up that maybe you shared some of the symptoms. Before we dive into the conversation, could you just share a little bit about how you discovered that you had ADHD?
Yeah, so my best friend growing up, we had no idea at the time that we both had ADHD, but we got along really well. And so, which was really kind of helpful when no one else understood me. Like my best friend, we understood each other. But later on, much later in life, in kind of our mid-30s, he ended up getting diagnosed with ADHD. And I didn't really think much of it because I thought I knew what ADHD was. And what I thought it was, I was like, oh, I know I don't have that. But his wife and my wife were really good friends, and they started kind of talking about it. And then my wife was like, wait a second, a lot of these things you're describing sound a lot like Jesse. And so she delicately introduced the idea to me, basically kind of said, like, I know that if I tell you you have ADHD, you're going to say no, and like not look into it or something like that. But so she was just like, she kind of engaged my curiosity. She was like, but maybe you just want to, like, I think it'd be worthwhile for you to learn a bit more about it and maybe explore what ADHD actually looks like. And I remember at the time even like saying like, oh, there's no way that I have ADHD because I have no problem focusing on things that I'm interested in, which is like the more you learn about ADHD, which is hilarious that I said that because like, yeah, that's what people with ADHD have no problem focusing on, those things that are interesting. That's where that hyper focus comes from. But so as soon as I started like looking into it, it pretty immediately like, oh, what? This is not what I thought ADHD was. I'm checking every one of these boxes. Everything is really speaking to me. And I remember actually in particular one thing I read, which isn't necessarily like, it's not like diagnostic criteria or anything like that. But there was one like post on Reddit or something like that where someone had talked about how they couldn't stand itchy t-shirt tags because like the sensory issue with that t-shirt tag. And that like really jumped out to me because I have always like ripped out the tags of every shirt I've ever bought because that drives me nuts. And that was like the first thing where I was like, oh, what? I thought this was just a weird me thing. And then everything else I was getting that same feeling of like, I thought this was just a weird me thing. Or I thought this was just like a family quirk because my brother and my dad are like this just like I am. But it turns out we all have ADHD and just didn't know it.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing. I also think it's funny that both your friend and you had it without knowing, because I know when I got when I sort of came into the world of ADHD and started suspecting it before my diagnosis, I was like, I'm pretty sure like a ton of my friends have this too. And then the question was, does everyone have ADHD, or do ADHDers gravitate towards other ADHDers, which is my current theory. Like, because just the interruption, for example, like my best friend and I, we just interrupt each other constantly. And I think to a lot of people that seems really, really rude. And for us, it's like this conversation is so stimulating. We can like keep
Yeah,
up with each other.
that's just sort of natural, the like interrupting. That's actually one of my favorite things about going to like an in-person conference for like people with ADHD. Like I just went to, there was a conference called Neurodiversion a couple of months ago, and it's just so, because everyone's interrupting each other and like going on crazy tangents and all over the place, and it's just so much fun because you don't feel like you have to I don't know, mask yourself or like feel like you have to apologize all the time. So there's something amazing about that. But yeah, to your point, I think absolutely that's what I've noticed as well, that people with ADHD really do kind of gravitate to each other. I feel like I've heard this story so many times where like one person gets diagnosed and then their entire friend circle gets diagnosed. And it's not because everybody has ADHD, but it's because they are drawn to each other because a lot of the things are saying, like the communication tendencies are just sort of aligned. Like that's, I'm sure, why my buddy and I, why we so quickly became friends as kids, because we could be our natural self around each other and that was like accepted, whereas that often isn't, you know, speaking of rejection, like that often isn't accepted among a lot of other people. That's where that rejection kind of comes in. And so whereas my buddy that also had undiagnosed ADHD, we weren't rejecting each other, we were just accepting and like just understanding where each other is coming from. And I think that is often why that those groups kind of come together so often.
I completely agree. That's my theory as well. It's, yeah, the being able to be your unmasked self and not feel like there's something inherently wrong with you. But on the topic of rejection or not getting rejected, so you write about in your book rejection-sensitive dysphoria, which is coined by William Dodson. And something that I know William Dodson has said when he speaks about rejection-sensitive dysphoria is that I think kids with ADHD, it's estimated, are exposed to something like, I think it was 12,000, but it might be even higher, more negative comments before the age of 12 than neurotypical kids. So there could be different wiring in our brain that I think may make our amygdala sort of become overwhelmed and get hijack the rest of our brain when we hear something what we perceive to be a rejection. But there's also a reality that we probably did experience more rejection early on in life. Was that the case for you? Did you feel like you didn't belong or you were being rejected when you were a child?
Oh, 1000%. It always, for so long, like I always knew something was different. I didn't know what it was. It was like something's different and I can't put my finger on it. Because nothing I'm doing seems to line up with, like, it felt like a lot of people would say like, oh, this thing is common sense. I was like, well, where do you find that out? Like, where's the book that tells you what's common sense? Because it's not common for me. A lot of the things that people would just expect you to figure out and know how to do, I just didn't, or I would do things differently and then get called out for it or rejected for it. And it just felt like, I know, like, I feel like this is super common with people with ADHD. Like growing up, I so wanted to be the good son. Like I wanted to be the good student. I wanted like all like I wanted the teachers to think I was like such a good student, doing all the good things and the right things, and all of that. And then there was just something that kept blowing that up, and I didn't know what was happening. I'm like, I'm trying so hard to do the right thing. Why am I getting treated like I'm the bad kid? Because my brain was just like not lining up with what the expectation was. And yeah, that estimate of the 10,000 negative messages or whatever it is, it I remember reading that for the first time and thinking like that seems like a really high number. But then I like started doing the math and calculate like, okay, so 10,000 over this many years, how many days is that? Okay, so it's about this many a day. And then so I kind of had that idea in my head of how many that was. And then I saw with my own kids who have ADHD, and I'm aware of it, so I try to not do any like negative messages. I'm trying to, really like be as encouraging as possible. But even myself, I'm seeing that negativity come out even when I'm like holding back. Just the like, hurry up, come on, we got to go get the thing. Like just that constant kind of like the like micro criticisms that happen. It's so hard to not do that. And so I think that estimate, which sounded high initially, I think that's probably right on because I heard so much of that stuff growing up, and it's so hard to not let that just like destroy your self-esteem and just feel rejected is such a good word because that's like that's what it felt like. It felt like whoever I was, like the core of who I am, is not good enough, and it's just being rejected by everyone around me. And it's brutal because I think I think early on it felt like everyone was trying to figure out like what's wrong, like what's going on with Jesse, and so like teachers and my parents and everything. And I think for the most part they were like all good intention, like trying to help figure out what's wrong. But ultimately, it was just a bunch of arrows that pointed at me, and I didn't have anywhere else to point. And so it was just like my shame backpack where I just kept piling every time something went wrong. I just put something more in the backpack, and then that just like weighs down your self esteem over time. Where it's so hard. I kind of think that's where this RSD idea like comes from, like feeling so deeply impacted and hurt by rejection. It's because we have it's like an old wound that has been re-injured over and over and over again. And so even when that rejection isn't real, it's just like perceived, where there's like something in us that's really afraid, like, oh, this is going to hit that weak spot of me again. And so I better do, there's multiple ways people respond. Me, I was blow up and get big and get angry, because, which I didn't know at the time. At the time, it felt justified, but I know now it was like defensive mechanism. Like, I don't want them to reject me, so I'm going to blow up so that we can't get to that part where they say the bad thing about me that I feel like is coming, because I'm so, just trying to be defensive about that wound, I know about for the years and years of rejection.
I like that you've put language to this because I think that I relate to a lot of what you're saying, and I think a lot of people listening probably can, but it's very unusual to actually hear it put into words. It's more like a feeling, like a why, I don't know why I'm getting so triggered by this thing, but that
Mm,
shame backpack, I love that metaphor because it really is what it feels like. And you touching on, the different defense mechanisms, so blowing up and getting angry. I think for me, it was people pleasing or just avoidance.
mhm.
Like I started a podcast about rejection because I spent so long avoiding any potential rejection, which is like the worst thing
Right.
ever. So yeah, I'm curious, going to blowing up and getting angry. What was the point where you kind of became aware of what was happening? Because I know that that is a journey in and of itself where you recognize that this is a defense mechanism, and that perhaps there is a different way you can approach things, or you could have a little bit more cognitive distance where you could at least be aware of what's happening. When did you kind of gain that awareness of what was happening?
Yeah, so you had mentioned Dr. William Dodson, who kind of coined the term, the rejection-sensitive dysphoria. And I had randomly heard a podcast with him where he talked about this. And that was the first time. It was almost like I felt like for several years after getting diagnosed, I kept like finding out new things. And I was like, what? This part of my life is from ADHD too? I had no idea this was connected. Like, I kind of thought that was just like, I don't know, an anger problem or like, things like that. I attributed it to other things. And so when I first heard that podcast, it was definitely like a huge light bulb of like, oh man, that is exactly the way he describes it is so good, where it's like, it's, it, it's like, ironically, I guess, he describes it really well, but it's so hard to describe that feeling when you feel that rejection. Because as Dr. William Dodson says, like it feels like physical pain. And for me, it's in my chest. And it's so intense, and it's so hard to describe for other people, how deep. Like for me, I think a word that I often kind of use to attribute to it is betrayal. It feels like extremely deep betrayal, which is like so, just like to my core. So it's so intense. And one thing, once I became aware of it, I think this is the really important thing. Like, I don't think it goes away. Like, it's not like I can turn that feeling off. Like, I am still going to feel that extreme, deep betrayal, in my chest when I feel that rejection. But now that I know it's a thing, now I can sort of recognize that feeling as being separate from reality. Because I think before, when you feel that deep betrayal, and like I said, I would respond, I would get big and I'd get mad. all of that felt 100% justified before, because now it wasn't me just like exploding at something. This is me getting deeply betrayed. And so I'm responding in kind. Like my response felt justified for that moment. And once I became aware that this other kind of emotional flooding thing related with rejection was what was actually happening behind the scenes, I could recognize that that's what it was. And so, like, a couple things happened after I learned about it and then read about it a bunch. And like at the time, I was seeing a therapist for like marriage counseling as we were basically, I got diagnosed with ADHD, and they were like, "Hey, maybe a counselor could help try to help our marriage." That it turns out 10 years of undiagnosed ADHD can do some damage in a marriage. But so we were seeing a therapist at the time, and we talked about this rejection-sensitive dysphoria. And one thing my therapist had said was when you're feeling that, when you're in the heat of it, in that moment, try to make it logical. Like try to remember your history with this person and ask yourself, does it make sense? And that's really sometime after that, we had one of those moments again because I had some sort of disagreement with my wife. I don't remember what it was about, something probably money, because that's a big one, but something not that important. But I felt that RSD, that rejection sensitivity, hit me in the core, and I recognized it. It was like this amazing moment where in the moment, like, this is that thing. This betrayal I feel isn't real. That's not what's going on. This is that thing that I read about, the RSD. And so I in the moment, literally like through gritted teeth, like to my wife, basically said like, I think this is the RSD. Can we have some space? And then we can talk again in like an hour. And so we basically just put a big old pause right in the middle of like our, heated discussion. And that worked. And because we had talked about it beforehand, she's like, oh, this was that thing. And we took a break. And then pretty quickly after that, I went through the exercise of like thinking like, does it make sense that we've been married for 10 years, where like all these things have happened. She's like trying to help me in different way, like just like reflecting on our positive like timeline until now. And then I'm just asking myself, does it make sense that right now in the middle of this discussion, she would decide to deeply betray me in this way? And the answer was like, no, that doesn't make any sense. Like, why would she do that? That doesn't make sense. Okay, well, if that doesn't make sense, well, then what I'm feeling right now isn't the way I want to respond isn't justified. That doesn't make sense because she didn't do the deep betrayal that I thought I was feeling. And that really helped me to calm down. And I think part of it, definitely not like a, neuroscientist or anything, but I think part of it may also be like trying to like activating the more logical part of your brain of like, I'm not just responding to the emotion. I'm trying to think logically, does it make sense that things led up to this deep betrayal? And logically it did not. And I think it's really important to, again, state, like, it did not take that feeling away. In the moment, I felt it. It was intense, and it's happened since, and I feel it. But giving it space and sort of like in telling myself that what I think is happening isn't logical has really helped it to, it dissipates quickly once I have been able to identify it.
You've touched on so many important things, and I feel it very deeply because this is probably the personal development thing I have, and I'm actively working the most on, because I think it's like my most toxic trait is to get overwhelmed with feelings of injustice. I feel like the world is against me, and obviously that's not logically what's happening. And so what you touch on, I think that book we were just talking about in the green room, Scattered Minds by Gabor Mate, is he talks about like it's the prefrontal cortex that is the part that of the brain that people with ADHD struggle with just the neural pathways, and that's what's responsible for logic, rationality, and when our amygdala or our emotional part of the brain, again, I'm a neuroscientist, this is basically my understanding of the brain, gets overwhelmed, that part almost goes offline. And that's what it feels like to me. It feels like my brain is offline. Like, it's like I'm being asked to think rationally, and it feels like all I can feel is just all the bad stuff, but no thoughts are really happening. But what I want to ask you, Jesse, is what you managed to do in that scene you painted with your wife, where you were able to say, this is it, this is the RSD. That, at least in my experience, is the hardest place to access that awareness before the reaction. I can intellectualize in retrospect. I can be like, oh, that time I blew up and whatever happened, blah, blah, blah,
Right.
was RSD. And now I can like piece together a story. But being able to catch it in the moments is challenging. And I think it takes a lot of practice. So I'm curious if you struggled, like kind of reaching a place where you're able to do that and what that journey looked like.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I will say another one of the great like experts in the ADHD space, Dr. Russell Barkley. I've read a couple of his books, and in one of those, he talks about like things you can do to quickly pause and just how important just even a couple of seconds of pausing before reacting, because it's that I for so long it's so easy to just react because we learn like our emotions are just like our body's doing certain things and us kind of learning what that means and then responding and kind of like, oh, my body feels a certain way, that's because I'm happy or I'm mad or I'm sad. That's kind of like the elementary level of emotions. And then as you develop more nuance, you're responding to different ways that your body responds to like a thing. And so when that like the rejection sensitivity hits and I feel all those things that feel to me like this extreme deep betrayal, the tricky thing to do is to try and pause. So there's a couple of things that Russell Barkley suggests, which are tiny, tiny things. And I think that's why they're effective, because they're so small. And like one of them literally is just move your hand over your mouth, or say, hmm, or like say like, let me think about that. Like something, it's just like these tiny little micro steps to give a little bit of time before it's like the big response is coming, but try to give any little thing that will slow it down for your, almost like your brain to catch up with what's actually happening. Because when you don't do that, like you'll go through, I'm sure so many people with ADHD will be able to relate to a situation not going as you expect. And then suddenly 20 minutes you're just like, what did I say? What in the world just happened? You felt like you were just along for the ride and never had a moment of control for what was happening in that situation. And I think these little kind of micro pauses can really help with that. And so when I reflect back on that, the time when I had that discussion with my wife, that's what I remember, putting my hand over my mouth and like verbally like thinking, like I think I said like, and I just tried to like elongate that to give myself a little time to slow down so I'm not frozen. I'm still kind of like engaged in the conversation, but it allows, it allowed me to catch up just enough to be able to recognize that thing, enough to be able to say, I think this is the RSD. Like I said, through gritted teeth. It was like, I didn't take the anger, I didn't take any of that feeling away. It was just like, there's a little part of my brain that was able to speak up enough to say like, hey, that RSD thing, this might be it. Like, don't like pay attention to this. And, yeah, so I feel like a lot of times with ADHD, I feel like a lot of the strategies almost feel or sound silly or, I don't know. I think there's this like tendency to discount something as like, oh, that's too childish, or I shouldn't need that, or things like that, or it's too small. But those little things can make a huge difference. And so that the quick thing is putting the hand over the mouth is like this physical thing that gives you just enough of a pause that can allow your brain at least some time to try and catch up. And so I highly recommend those quick little Russell Barkley tips.
I think it's genius because I personally have struggled so much with kind of creating that cognitive distance to recognize what's happening. And you put the words so perfectly where you said, like getting yourself not just along for the ride, but I guess in control in the driver's seat. And I think it's the most awful feeling that probably a lot of people who have struggled with regulation can relate to, is feeling like what just happened? Like, who was that person? I I didn't act in a way that this version of me that can reflect on it would have liked to have acted. And so that
Yeah, yeah,
hand
yeah,
of
and
the mouth, yeah.
yeah, and I even feel like sometimes it can almost be like an out of body experience. Like I feel like I'm almost just like watching myself doing this thing and being like, "Oh, this is not going well. What are you doing, Jesse? You need to back out of this." Meanwhile, I'm like moving, animated, saying the things, and I think that pause is like allowing that voice to speak into the situation. That sort of like out of body voice to be like, "Hey, this isn't what we should be doing. If I can pause for a moment, maybe I can take the steering wheel back just for a little bit and veer us away from that cliff we're flying towards right now."
Such a good analogy. Let's not veer over the cliff because we're not in the driver's seat. We're like in the back offline
Yes.
as
Yep.
the car goes off the cliff. So something that you mentioned in your newsletter, and you actually mentioned in one of our emails, shifting gears a little bit, was that you were recently laid off. And I went and took a look at your Substack, and so you shared a Substack about that. And then the next day, you said that you were overwhelmed with the positive responses you were getting from your
Mm.
community, and that you were flying off to a conference. I think the conference you mentioned earlier. So I wanted to highlight that because being laid off is an awful rejection. That's extremely painful, I imagine.
Hmm.
And the natural instinct for many of us, and I think especially people with ADHD, is to hide away in shame and not tell anyone because, like, or I feel awful. And you did the opposite of that, and you were able to, you know, get the support of your community. And I believe like community is the biggest pillar of rejection resilience, a thing we need. So, what
Mm.
I want to ask you is what made you decide to share that with your community? And yeah, I guess that's the first question.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it was a really tough situation, not very fun. I kind of, I did, without getting into it, I had a feeling that it might be coming for a little bit. So at least I wasn't like completely shocked and like completely out of the blue. But yeah, being laid off is such a unique experience because it feels just like you got fired, but it supposedly is like, most of the time, the idea of being laid off is that it has nothing to do with you. It's like a financial decision that you just happen to be the line item in the spreadsheet where it made sense that like these jobs need to change for whatever business decision that whoever made that choice or whatever. But it doesn't. It still feels like you got fired. It still feels like a rejection. It feels very personal, even though supposedly it's not supposed to be. And that's hard, especially I feel for so many people. It's kind of tough right now. I feel like a lot of people, especially in my industry, like tech industry, there's a lot of layoffs happening, and it's so hard because not only do you have to deal with like feeling this major rejection, but then it's like here you go, here's a really really bad rejection, and then now you have to try and re-find your confidence to go find a new job because your confidence is so important in like finding that new job. So it's just a really really crappy situation for so many people because it's like here's the worst feeling you can have, and then like that sets you up the worst way possible to try and like find your new job. So it's really, really tough in that way, which is it's super unfortunate. And I feel for a lot of people going through that. Yeah, the reason like I shared, I mean, I feel like one, I've just sort of become an open book with so many things like this, and benefited by doing that. It's been really helpful for me to not bottle that stuff up where I probably would have for so long, and also just sort of knowing, hey, I have this amazing sort of community. I have this amazing community, and I bet people in this community would want to be able to help me if they knew. And so I'm almost like robbing them by not letting them know of this situation because, yeah, I just know people would want to help. And it was definitely the best thing I could have ever done because I got so much encouragement. I had a lot of people that sent me like really great positive leads and stuff like that. But even more than that, I just so many people, showing positivity and encouragement and just like telling just saying really nice stuff, telling me how much like my content or whatever the stuff I've done has helped them and stuff like that. So it was really amazing. Like I said, I was able to get the opposite of what I think so many people go through after getting laid off. I was able to get all of this really positive, encouraging energy that helped me like yeah, that's right. I'm doing some good stuff here. Like I was able to kind of find that confidence through having that encouragement. And I definitely think like I have that kind of like, I don't know, quote unquote, unfair advantage of having this great community to sort of fall back on. And like you said, I think that's so important to have somebody that you can tell this sort of stuff to when you're going through a type of rejection like this. Because when you just bottle up yourself, like that's not going to do anyone any good, keeping it just locked up inside.
Yeah, yeah, I completely agree. And thank you for sharing that because I think that people in general are starved for hearing vulnerable stories. It's a part of why I wanted this podcast. And so I think when you give your community the privilege of seeing all sides of you and not like this two-dimensional, oh, things are going great all the time, because that's just not a human
Mhm.
experience. You let them connect
Right.
with you on a deeper level, and of course they want to support you and be there because they've been seeing all the other sides of you and they kind of have that connection. But for anyone listening who doesn't have thousands and thousands of newsletter subscribers, you can talk to your community that is with you, like your friends, your family, people who you trust. Because I also think, like, as you're describing it, I think that there's like a kind of like, the way I visualize it is there's like a shame blanket that sort of happens when something bad happens to us, whether it's a layoff or a breakup or, any form of major life rejection of some sort. And when you share it with your community, it almost like eases that. It's no longer suffocating you. It's kind of come off, and now you no longer
Yeah.
you've taken away the power that it had over you, because now it's there, it's out in the open, and it's not the thing that controls you or your narrative in that way. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. I feel like it's so natural to want to hide that sort of thing. Anything that feels vulnerable like that, we want to, there's so much of that like shame associated with it. Where we don't want anyone to be able to see something that we're ashamed of, and so our nature is to like hide it. And that, unfortunately, we don't realize we're giving it all the power when we do that.
Yeah.
We're holding it like with your like we're literally wrapping ourselves and holding it tight around us when that's the opposite of what we should or what we want to be doing. We want to release it and move beyond it and get away from it. And but our instinct is to grab it and kind of pull it tight, and then it just becomes part of everything we're doing. It's like part of the story. Yeah, or yeah, suffocating. It's just like it's got us wrapped up and we're holding it so that it has us wrapped up. Yeah, so I love that idea of really trying to release it by sharing it and being open and vulnerable with it. And that, not only is that helpful for you, but that is helpful for other people where they feel that they don't have to hold that thing tight and close and hidden, and they can release their vulnerability as well. Because we're all going through so much of this stuff, this rejection, that whether it's the breakups or layoffs or whatever, and there's no reason to be like all of us are going through some of these in different times of our life, and there's no reason to be ashamed when it happens to you. Yeah, so I think there's a lot of power in just being really open with that.
Yeah, yeah, I completely agree. But it's hard. And, I just
Yes.
like you, I'm very into doing it. And then there's times where it feels really raw and I'm like, ooh, I don't want to tell a single soul. I don't want to tell like my best friend and my partner about this. So, Jesse, what I want to know is, when did you become open about sharing vulnerable sides of you? Was that always there, or was that something that you learned to do as you got older?
Yeah, I would say I do think in general, people with ADHD are more likely to be kind of an open book and just like there's memes about people with ADHD oversharing and not realizing it. And some of that may be kind of like I mentioned before, we never got that common sense book. We never got the instructions on social interaction or whatever it is. And so I think there is just generally, I probably have like a tendency to overshare once I feel like a little bit of connection with someone. Now I feel like I can tell them everything, and then it's like, oh, maybe that was a little too much. Um, but part of it really was so the whole reason that I now have why I ended up writing the book and grew the newsletter and stuff like that was because I joined this writing challenge like 4 or 5 years ago. It was called Ship 30 for 30. And the idea was you write a small essay about a different topic every single day, and then you ship it, like you release it on Twitter or whatever for people to read. And through that, I kind of quickly found that, hey, talking about these things that are really deep and personal to me, especially about ADHD, it's really helping a lot of other people. People are seeing in themselves, like things in themselves through my sharing of my own kind of vulnerabilities. And that became kind of really powerful, realizing how much of an impact it was having on other people. And so I think that started really early in my kind of content creation world, which has been like the last 4 to 5 years. Pretty quickly on, it was like this is making a difference. And the more honest and vulnerable and authentic and all of that about my own story that I am, the more it seems to be impactful for people. And so the more I'm okay sharing about certain things, I just know that that's going to help some people that they're probably wrapped up in that blanket. They're afraid to talk about that thing, and seeing somebody else talk about it allows them to be open as well. And so I think that was really a big part of it, just quickly seeing how much writing about that stuff and talking about it on like shows like this could really make an impact for people.
We're so aligned in mission, so I'm glad you're here sharing this so that people can unwrap themselves with a blanket. Because I mean, similar observations and similar desire to have people just see, I guess, the impact it can have on being more vulnerable and open with all layers and sides of our stories, which allows for greater connection. So, something that you talk about in your book has amazing ADHD hacks or strategies. I don't know if hacks is the word, but a lot of tools that people can put into practice. And anyone
Hmm.
listening, it's like a 2 hour listen on Audible. And I don't know how long it takes to read, but 2 hours is not very long to listen to an audiobook. And one of the things that I loved about your about your kind of strategies is you talk about like gamifying a lot of tasks. So what the example I'm thinking of is the dishes, which I hate and I can't make interesting. And you think of like ways to make it a little bit more interesting, like saving a good podcast that you want to listen to only listen to that while you're doing the dishes, or is there a way you could make it novel or interesting? So I want to know if you would have any advice for listeners on how they could gamify or add novelty or intrigue or fun to rejection. So maybe it's, putting themselves in the wake of rejection and there's a lot of resistance there. Are there ways we could, I guess, set it up in a way that makes it interesting for our ADHD brains?
That is such a really interesting question. I've never really thought about that. Gamifying rejection. You know immediately made me think of? There's this really cool group that they help people with speaking. I believe it's called Ultra Speaking, and I did a small cohort with them like a year or two ago. And a lot of what so like public speaking, like they're trying to help you get more comfortable with doing public speaking. And a lot of what they do is all of these like little micro kind of improv game sorts of things to really get you more comfortable with what is going to happen on the fly. And so let me see if I can think of a couple of these games. And the reason I thought of it is because that doing it is terrifying, because you're just in this small group. There's like five of you, you do like breakout rooms. You'd have like five people in there, and then you have to do this like speech exercise that's only like a minute long. But you just feel so exposed and like it's terrifying because like one of the things that they would do, I might have this wrong, but I remember like one exercise would be there would be like a word on the screen, and then you're supposed to start talking about the word. You're just like kind of riffing specifically on the word, and then the word would change, and you have to immediately change the topic to go with the new word. And you would do that like nonstop for like a minute. And there'd be another exercise where you got to pick the topic, but then it would give you a number between 1 and 10, and you were supposed to match that level. So if the number was 10, your energy and volume, you should be like shouting
I
at the
love
top,
that.
like as loud as you can for a 10. And then a 1 obviously is like a whisper. And so you're talking about your topic, and then that number would be changing, and you'd have to change your rhythm. So you'd get really quiet if it was like a 3 like this. And then it would get really big, like a 7. And you'd have to do it. And it was so like in the moment, it's very stressful. But afterwards, almost universally, every single time we did one of those exercises, we get to the end and we're like, that was amazing. And it kind of is, even though it's not specifically about like rejection, it's kind of that same sort of idea where you're really just like, I don't know if it's almost like exposure therapy in a way,
Yeah,
where you're
yeah.
just sort of like forcing yourself to experience this. And then I definitely noticed again with like speaking, I think of that stuff all the time where if I'm like recording a video or I'm speaking and I try to think of that 1 to 10 dynamic, and I'm usually not going to do a 1, I'm usually not going to do a 10, but it helps remind me to kind of like bounce around a little more in the middle. But yeah, I think that really, because being on stage is somewhere where you're going to feel rejection. It's terrifying. You're going to be there, you're going to be speaking, and then you're going to notice the person that's like on their phone, not paying attention, or you're going to notice somebody getting up and walking out in the middle of you talking. It's just like, so you're like, hey, I look out and I can see 100 people, and that is 100 opportunities for rejection that can happen anytime I'm up here speaking. So that's definitely what kind of immediately came to mind, and super helpful. So that's super interesting. That idea of trying to gamify facing on the rejection.
So what was that program called that you were doing? Does it have a name? Was it something that someone can do, or was it specific to
Yes, let me look it up to, I believe it's called, yeah, Ultra Speaking. So
ultra speaking?
ULTRA Speaking. Yeah, and they're
I love
awesome. And
that.
they actually have, like, I had forgotten about it, and now that we're talking about it, I'm gonna go in because I have a login so I can still do some of those exercises. But yeah, they're great. I don't know if this is still what they're doing, but they were doing where they would do like a cohort of like a group of 20 people that were wanting to get better at public speaking. Awesome, awesome. Yeah, highly recommend them. They're great.
I love that. As you're describing it, it sounds a bit like improv to me. So I did like a 12-week improv course last year, and
Yeah.
it was in person. And when you are going to form such great connections with those people because you are like making fools of yourself with them like every week. But at the end of the improv course, because it was kind of similar stuff, we'd like get at something where it'd be like you what sort of things would it be? I don't know, it'd just be very random prompts. Like you get handed a shoe and you get told that you need to like be a salesperson and some like very specific thing and perform. But at the end of it, we had to perform in front of like everyone and had to invite like 3 or 4 friends and family and you had to perform in front of it. And I remember my partner saying, it seems like the whole point of that was just so that you could get comfortable with making a fool of yourself because like none of that content was particularly, it's not rehearsed. It's not like acting where you're like put on a
Yeah.
play. Like everything is improvised there and they kind of give you things that just make you look ridiculous. And I would totally describe it as exposure therapy. It's getting really comfortable with looking really silly in front of people and it's a good tool. It's a good skill to have, I think.
Yeah, yeah, it definitely felt very similar to improv. I'm actually just remembering another exercise, which I'll mention because it was such an interesting one. The where it would give you two objects or like two, maybe it was like two words or two phrases. So it'd be like yo-yo and I don't know, sun. And then your job was to quickly say like a yo-yo is like the sun because they're both round or something like that. And then it would give you two new ones, but it was going so fast and you had to just like really on the spot, like try to like, this is like this because and you'd say like stuff that seemed crazy or just like really out there. And it was the really interesting part of it. I know we're kind of like a little bit on a tangent, but the really interesting part of it was you would say all this stuff, and in the moment you felt like I didn't even know what I was saying. Like I was just like it seemed just so out there. And then other people afterwards would be like, "Oh, this thing you said about that was so profound. I never would have thought of that way." And you're like, "I didn't even know." Like I don't even know how I made that connection between these two things that made it sound like really interesting. Anyway, it was a really fun just like improv exercise of quickly forcing yourself to come up with something. Like tying back to rejection is terrifying to do because you're just so open and out there and just like you're the only one talking and everyone else is just listening to you. Like you said, kind of make a fool of yourself. And but through doing that, you just get comfortable with it. And improv kind of makes me think of like stand-up comedy and like those people that do like stand-up comedy, they feel so much rejection. Like most of the time, their jokes, like no one's laughing at most of their jokes, even the best comedians, until they narrow it down. They're just like rejection, rejection, rejection. Oh, people laughed at that bit. So now I need to reframe it to focus more on that bit that was funny and cut out all the other stuff that was just like nonstop rejection. And so I don't think I could ever do comedy because that sounds like a bit too much rejection for me. But I suppose it's something that over time you kind of get used to it and you just treat it as like informative. That's helping you know what is working and what isn't. Which is sort of like what I was doing with my writing early on. I was writing about a bunch of different things, and I could see which thing. It wasn't so much rejection as just non-engagement, and that kind of allowed me to see like what is actually connecting and helping people, and what is kind of like not. And again, that's where I kind of saw that vulnerability was really being open and honest about myself was where people really found themselves in my writing.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think non-engagement feels like rejection. Like, yes, it may not be someone saying, no, you suck, but especially when you're like open, honest to something you really care about, standing on a
Yeah.
stage and delivering comedy or writing about, most writers, we attach writing very closely to our identity. So having silence or no one engaging can feel very rejecting. And to your point, I think I've heard the description of kind of how comedians come up with their sets is that it's like they go to those open night comedy nights or like very small comedy nights, and every time someone laughs, like maybe someone laughs once in their whole set, that's the content they use next time, and then they kind of collect all these bits of content from the little bits of laughter until eventually they have a show that has now kind of they've combined those bits of content from many, many, many nights where people were not laughing for like 50 minutes, but maybe laughing for like 1 minute of what they
Right,
said.
right. Yeah, that
So
actually
yeah,
reminds me. I just saw just some random comedian clip doing like he was telling a joke, and at some point he said something, and everybody laughed, and he said something that was like unintentionally funny, and he was like, "That's not the punchline," and then he waited a beat, and he said, "But it will be the punchline," and he like literally grabbed a notebook and wrote it down. Like that is clearly what the punchline is going to be going forward from here because that's what everybody laughed at, which I thought was such an open, hilarious moment of like him realizing like, no, no, this is the punchline now. Like whatever I had before isn't worth it because so many people laughed at this, and I wasn't even trying to hit that bit. I thought it was, yeah, it's such a great example of that.
the audience dictates the punchline, respond to your audience. But yeah, just
Yes,
one
yeah.
final thing. And as you're describing your improv, I think that the goal of this challenge, that sounds like from you and also from me doing improv and stuff, is releasing inhibition. And I think that for any sort of rejection challenge, we want to kind of get out of that space of all those things, because this is what came through in my improv classes, is that the worst content came from when you were thinking. So there would be all these exercises that would stop you from thinking, because the minute you start thinking, the content just gets so boring. It's not fun to watch. It's like you're just not a good performer. So you got to do whatever you can to get past that stage of you kind of holding yourself back and dictating what you're going to do. And in a way, kind of rejection challenges, exposure therapy helps us get into that action mode and not in that deliberating, what are we going to do mode. And I love that. I think that would be a great way to break through the inhibition. um,
Yeah,
but yeah,
yeah, 100%.
so this has been a fabulous conversation. I want to ask you before we wrap up where listeners can find you. Of course, you have your Substack, you are on Instagram, and of course, they should read your book, but you could maybe talk a little bit about those things and anywhere else they should be heading.
Yeah, absolutely. So, my book is called Extra Focus: The Quick Start Guide to Adult ADHD, and it's available everywhere books are. Online, I my username is ADHD Jesse, and I'm on probably a new social media channel like every week. So all the social media, you can find me ADHD Jesse. But the best place to go would be extrafocus.com, which is in addition to the name of my book, that's the name of my newsletter. And so I write weekly about ADHD. And just like we were talking about in this episode, being vulnerable, being open, and really just discussing what living with ADHD is like. So yeah, extrafocus.com would be the best place to go.
Awesome. All the links will be in the show notes, so highly recommend. The content is fantastic. And what's next, Jesse? Because I know you mentioned a few months ago that you got laid off. Are you focusing on your business full time, or are you looking at other things?
Yeah, yeah. Thanks for asking. So I'm in sort of this weird state right now. We had mentioned before I got laid off, and then the very next day I flew to that neurodiversion conference where I met a lot of my, got to hang out with a lot of my ADHD friends, a lot of who are entrepreneurs, and so I got a lot of. I feel like half the people when they heard the news were like, "Oh, I'm so sorry. Let me know if I can help," that sort of thing. And then the other half of people, a lot of the people at the conference were like, yay, now you can do all this other stuff. You've got so much more like freedom that you didn't have before. And so that's sort of what I'm exploring right now. Doing like I've been meaning to do an ADHD motivation course for a long time. So I've been like focusing some energy on that and also getting more into YouTube, which again, that'll be the ADHD Jesse is my YouTube channel. And there's a few different things like that I'm exploring. And I'm doing so many things because I have ADHD. I can't sit still. I'm building an app with a friend of mine called WavePal, and it's an app for helping. Basically, the tagline is "Be the friend you want to be." Because I have such a bad memory, I forget that I haven't talked to my sister in a year and that sort of thing. I'm like really just not very great at remembering how much time has passed since I last talked with somebody. And so WavePal is an app we're building to help you remember, like, when was the last time I talked with this friend of mine, and get a reminder of like, hey, I want to reach out to this person every couple of months, and it's been 2 months. I want to get a reminder to tell me that, hey, you should send a message to your friend Dave because it's been a while. And that's at wavepal.app. So that is some of the things I'm building right now, trying to navigate and see if the like self-employment path is something that will work for me. And so far, so good.
Support the self-employment path, but also I read your Substack about friendships and WavePal, and I'm so excited for it because I am awful with. I have this very much out of sight, out of mind, and I
Yeah, yeah.
will see my friends again and be like, "Wow, I really like you and really missed you," but it's like I forgot all about their existence and what kind of people they were when they were not in my line of vision for a couple of months or whatever it was. So yeah, I think
Yeah,
that's a
yeah.
brilliant idea.
Awesome, cool. Thank you. Yeah, that out of sight, out of mind thing is so huge because like I some, I mentioned my sister because like we have like I know some families don't have great relationships. I have a great relationship with my sister, but she moved out of state and we don't naturally see each other like we used to. And so we almost joke that we'll text each other on our birthdays and like kind of joke and be like, "Hey, it's your birthday, so this is the one time a year I remember to text you." And since we started building WavePal, I just her birthday is in August, but I just texted her like a few weeks ago because I was reminded of like, hey, I don't have to wait until her birthday. Like we have a great relationship. Let's reach out and like find out what she's doing up in Alaska and things like that. So yeah, I'm really excited for it. I think it's helping me already. It's really early, but it's helping me already, and so I'm really excited to see more people get to use it and hopefully help them with their relationships as well.
I think it's brilliant. Yeah, this is definitely a pain point for me, so I'm sure it's a pain point for many, many other people. So excited for that. Well, thank you so much, Jesse. It's been such a pleasure having you on My Rejection Story.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. This was great.
This was My Rejection Story, hosted by me, Alice Draper.